I'd like to call the meeting of Municipal Council to order. It's Tuesday, May the 13th, and we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral home of the Mi'kmaq people. It's the traditional home, and we are happy to be sharing in that land with them. Are there any announcements, acknowledgements, or recognition? Councillor Hubley.
I would just like to let you know that I'll be leaving the meeting at 6:15 to attend a ratepayer meeting at Hempford, and I'll rejoin via Teams after the ratepayer meeting.
Okay. That's an important meeting to be part of. Thank you. Any other acknowledgement? Councillor Burns.
I would just like to let council know that I'll be declaring a conflict of interest for item 10.3.1, and at the appropriate time, we'll step away from the table.
Thank you. Councillor Oikel.
I also have a conflict of interest for 11.1.1.
Are there any other announcements before we begin? We do have a proclamation, which is International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. A proclamation in support of the municipality of the District of Lunenburg, recognizing and advocating for the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. Whereas Saturday, May the 17th, 2025 is the 22nd Annual Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. This day is recognized for creating more visibility, understanding, and eradicating hatred and violence against people of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. Whereas our municipality strives to promote protection for all groups in the community and to end oppression and phobias against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. And whereas this day is to recognize the commitment our community has made to actively promote inclusivity initiatives and anti-homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia within our municipality. And whereas today we celebrate the 2S LGBTQ community in Lunenburg County and maintain our ongoing commitment to fight systems of oppression that impact them. Therefore, be it resolved that I, Mayor Elspeth McLean-Weil, on behalf of the municipality of the District of Lunenburg, do hereby proclaim May the 17th, 2025 as International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. It is now time for public input, and just for, I know there are several members of the gallery that are wishing to make public input. This is one of several opportunities that we provide to engage with council and convey your interests and concerns in the work that we are endeavoring to present. Residents are welcome to use the public input portion of the meeting to share their thoughts with council on municipal topics that are important to them. We ask that all statements be respectful of other members of the public and staff and council. We ask that when you come forward to the mic that you provide your name and your civic address. If you have a question or concern that you'd like to have addressed, we ask that you leave your email so that we can contact you. The chair will respond to questions that can easily be answered, and if it's something that needs direction from staff, we will do that. We will email you with an answer to your question or a response to your concern. We may contact you to get additional information or further clarification on the matter to assist us in responding. We will require that you provide your, as I said, your email address so that we can follow up. We will provide a summary of answers and questions and responses at a future council meeting under business arising from the minutes. This will form part of the public record so that everyone that was listening or in attendance at the meeting will know the answers to the questions or concerns that you presented. In this way, we provide follow-up, and that you are not only the only resident with that concern, others will learn as well. Statements and questions related to personnel or operations can be emailed to the Chief Administrative Officer, Tom McEwen, who's sitting on my left. So we allow 15 minutes for public input today, and we share that amongst the people that are in the gallery. And I know of at least two people that would like to present tonight, Ms. Varner and Mr. Himmelman. Is there anyone else that wants to provide public input? I don't see anybody else. So at this point, we'll ask Jennifer Varner to come forward and to speak You'll have 7.5 minutes to make your presentation.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Varner. My civic address is 107 Stanburn Road in Barse Corner. And just before I begin saying my part, the young lady that's with me, Cindy Meisner, she was wondering, she had sent an email, and I think it was passed on to all of the councillors, and she wondered if that is part of her public input. And so I said I'd ask.
So that will be, we will refer to all the pieces of input that we've received. If you're not present, we do recognize it in the, when we get to that stage. So thank you for that, Cindy, and we will, it is part of what's been distributed to all the councillors, and it will be referenced in the discussion when that comes forward.
Okay. And so I shouldn't be nervous about public speaking, but but I'll take a couple of breaths and share. I did send an email the other evening, which I believe you all also received, sharing my concerns. Since then, I'm very glad to have had Mayor Elspeth send me an email with the link to the April 15th meeting, which I did subsequently watch, which also brought up some questions or concerns at that time. And so I'm just going to read my thoughts on this matter. I understand and appreciate the reasoning for the need of a nuisance bylaw. My objection is not to the need or to the explanation. My objection is to the wording of the bylaw and its subjectivity. There is no measurable standard by which to assess whether something is a nuisance or is not without having to go to court, as was explained when the vagueness of the wording of the bylaw was brought up in the April 15th meeting. So I object strongly to the assertion that these cases are tried in provincial court and thus a justification for the intentional vagueness of the wording. The bylaw should not require an obligation of going to court in order to determine that something is a nuisance. The presentation and responses of April 15th demonstrates an expectation on residents to hire a lawyer in order to get a definition in an affordability crisis. The presenter speaks in terms of court, but my understanding is that the purpose of bylaw is to grant residents with clarity of rules and expectations, not to require residents to go to court in order to determine whether they have actually violated the bylaw or are within their rights without having to involve law enforcement. There are ways to give greater clarity in regards to light, sound, and smell, and greater clarity is needed. I appreciate that the standard has been increased from 1 resident to 2 residents. I've read a number of the different municipality of district bylaws for the other districts. So Argyle, Barrington, Guysborough. There are some that I noted don't have or are voting on theirs tonight as well, like St. Mary. And so I noticed that for a lot of them, they only require 1 resident. So I do appreciate that increase of 2, and I wanted to commend you guys for that. And I agree that within sight and sound should be the standard, or within sight or sound, the hearing. But I believe that it should be a standard for both of the residents that are bringing forward the complaint, not just one person convincing somebody else in another part of the district to come forward. Furthermore, I believe that reliance solely on witness testimony is not sufficient. There needs to be greater proof, and the offense needs to be taking place at present. If the RCMP cannot come out and assess the offense, why would a charge go through? Are we saying that a person can be charged if an offense is no longer taking place? The infraction should be presently happening and causing the nuisance in the present, or some demonstration or evidence such as video. Otherwise, the enjoyment of property is not being interfered with. We require greater evidence than this for more serious infractions. Why would we not require similar standards of proof? RCMP saying that it is low priority is not a safeguard against abuse. I'm not sure why that was brought up in the other meeting. that statement, because what happens if that were to change? In my estimation, such a statement is irrelevant to the consideration of this bylaw. In watching the April 15th meeting, the explanation defending the bylaw's vagueness demonstrated the subjectivity of it. Furthermore, the statement that a criminal code conviction did not modify certain behavior demonstrates that what is needed is not an avenue for prosecution at a lower level, but rather guidelines and prescriptions for residents to follow. In 2018, work was being done on our church building in New Germany. The next-door neighbor came over to complain about the noise. Now, I find it hard to believe that since the incorporation of the municipality, there has never been a governance for noise, but perhaps the parameters that were used in this case were from a local town. Either way, my husband was able to speak of guidelines that included a range of hours between which he was allowed to work. He assured the neighbor he would be done before the end of the permitted time, and this satisfied the neighbor, and there was no need to involve law enforcement or the court system. Wouldn't that be better? My husband was within the understood legal parameters, and there was no opinions or interpretations in conflict, and I believe that would be preferable. Interfering with the enjoyment of one's property is too vague and can be disproportionately applied because one person's enjoyment of their property could result in the interference of another person and vice versa. It is as with burning laws. We know we are able to burn at certain times. Residents know what the regulations are and whether they are violating those regulations or not. If the council doesn't want to increase the opportunities for vexatious complaints and litigations, greater clarity is needed to protect residents from such. I understand that this bylaw was intentionally formed as it is, but I do not believe that that means it is the correct decision. So I'm asking that this be paused so that it can be amended to take some of these considerations into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And our CAO has been taking notes, so, and we will be bringing this forward and discussing and addressing some of the issues I think that you raised, Ms. Varner, as well. Mr. Himmelman?
Hello, Andrew Himmelman, live in Newcombville. Just want to chat on a couple subjects. One, the public nuisance. I believe the section is 430.4 of the criminal code, which there's already a section that's the lawful enjoyment, commit mischief by willfully interrupting the lawful enjoyment of property without legal justification or excuse and without color of right on the property. Now, just being around here for the last year, one of the complainants was back in Cornwall, and our current justice system was used. There are two of the property owners actually got, I believe, from court documents, 18 months of probation and a $100 fine. And that was the charge. So I'm not sure if a nuisance bylaw is required, considering one of the main complainants on this, or complaints for the nuisance bylaw, you know, they have been found guilty underneath the criminal law. There is something in place for what was taking place. So that's just one note for this evening. The other, I still want to raise concern of this blue route. The province has identified Highway 332 for a blue route for bicycles all over the province to come down, because there's extra wide shoulders on the road, which there are not. When the DOT paints the lines, they paint the gravel. Like, there is no reason that the province should be advertising from Upper LaHave to Riverport as a destination for 100 bicycles at a time. We're coming into that season, and I would like to see the municipality send an email to the province and ask why this has become a blue route, because their own advertising says extra wide road or shoulders, and there are none. The other thing is awarding tenders to businesses that are not local. Sometimes they don't fully follow what they have bid on, and they're not aware of local, I would say, our local communities. One being a current modal awardal of a contract down in Riverport, and right in section 12.3 of the modal wayfinding signage RFP, which is 2024-05-400, talks about traffic control, and you guys have a contractor down there blocking basically all of Kingsburg Road off without traffic control. So we've got local contractors that know the area that are putting bids in, and you know, you could have a contractor, say from New Brunswick, who's doing it, not knowing what the actual traffic is, and they're just putting a bid in blindly with no traffic control or anything, while a local company would put a bid in that knows the area and knows that there's 30 vehicles an hour. So anyways, that's all. That's something for engineering. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and on the safety issue related to that, we'll follow up with that tomorrow, I'm sure. We will move on to the approval of the agenda. Would someone make that a motion? Deputy Mayor Vino, a seconder for that. Councillor Moore. All those in favor of accepting the adopting the agenda as circulated? Motion is carried unanimously. The minutes of the April 22nd meeting were circulated. Are there any corrections? Don't see any. I approve the minutes from April 22nd as circulated. Do we have any business arising from the minutes that need to be addressed? No, I didn't think so. We have the awarding of tenders and the award of tender for municipal services building property maintenance service. And Mr. Burgess, Mr. Richardson coming forward to give us a short brief on this. We're asking for everybody to be, we have a very lengthy agenda tonight, so not that we want to cut you short, but we want you to be brief.
We can be brief. So good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Tyler Richardson, Municipal Engineer here at the Municipality District of Lunenburg, and with me is Jamie Burgess, Senior Municipal Engineer here at the municipality. So this tender was issued on March 27th, 2025 and closed on April 10th, 2025 at 2 p.m. local time. 4 bids were received by the tender deadline. 2 of these received bids did not meet the mandatory requirements and therefore were disqualified. This tender will provide lawn maintenance services such as mowing, tree pruning, and lawn care for the municipal services building here at 10 Champlain Drive. The received and accepted bids are summarized in the table below. These bids were from William A. Gerhard Property Improvement and Nature's Reflections Landscaping. The municipal services building requires ongoing maintenance on the exterior grounds during the spring, summer, and fall months. Awarding of this tender will ensure the turf, trees, and shrubs are properly maintained and the grounds are kept neat and free of tall grass, tree limbs, and other debris on the building. We recommend that council authorize staff to award tender 2024-01006 municipal services building property maintenance services to William A. Gerhard Property Improvement in the amount of $457.07 excluding HST.
Would someone, any questions for clarification on the report? Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Tyler. Is that a 12-month contract? Is that an annual contract? Because
It's an annual contract, but it's basically, it's an annual contract, but it's for gardening.
So no
So
snow, that's not snow or any of that stuff at all?
No, it isn't.
So really more like a 10 or 9 month?
We make them go all year round because it involves sweeping the parking lot
Okay.
and things like that.
And so on the one other bid that came in, that was that a cost amount? You said two were disqualified and one other was up for possible. And what was that a cost issue or a quality issue that they were not chosen?
They didn't meet mandatory requirements that were asked for in the tender?
No, I understand two did not, but there were 4 in total. 2 did not and one did and one went to Gerhardt's.
Gerhardt's was the lower bid of the two.
That's
at the
what I was,
cost.
that's
Okay.
what thank you.
Yep.
That's all I wanted to know if.
9,000 versus 58.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that.
Would someone put this, any other questions could someone put this motion on the floor, and please? Councillor Oikel?
To Mayor McLean Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council award tender 2024-01006 municipal service building property maintenance services to William A. Gerhard Properties Improvement in the amount of $58,457.07, excluding HST, and I so move.
Someone second the motion? Seconded by Councillor Moore. Is there further discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hand. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. 7.2, which is the awarding of capital project, supply and installation of accessible kayak launch and dock system. Ms. Butt.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I am here this evening to seek approval from Council to authorize staff to award contract to Eagle Beach Contractors Limited for the supply and installation of an Easy Docks accessible kayak launch and dock system at Miller Point Peace Park in the amount of $88,433. A detailed quotation for the supply and installation of the accessible kayak launch and dock system was obtained through the public procurement process using Canoe Procurement Group of Canada, which MODL is a member. So the Easy Docks accessible launch system is a specialized piece of equipment, and through Canoe, Easy Docks provided a quotation from a local supplier and installer in Nova Scotia, which is Eagle Beach Contractors Limited. So the project includes the installation of a reinforced concrete pad, 100 feet of aluminum post-dock system with composite decking and railing to meet accessibility requirements, and an accessible launch, curbing, transfer bench, and signage on the accessible launch as well. So the allowance for the cost of this project, among others within Miller Point Peace Park, has been included in the capital budget for this fiscal year.
Questions? Are we eligible for any grants associated with this project?
Yes, the municipality did apply for grant funding through the province's Community Access Ability Grant, and we anticipate receiving upwards of $40,000 to go towards the cost of this project.
Councillor Brooks?
Was this a single bid on this project?
So using Canoe procurement, so you can think of it like a large...
I'm familiar with Canoe,
Okay,
thank you.
Wonderful. So Easy Docks is the product. So Canoe procurement has Easy Docks as a supplier. So we are able to go directly to the product manufacturer for a quotation of the product. And they have local installers and suppliers that distribute their product across Canada. So for the province of Nova Scotia, that specific installer and supplier of their product is Eagle Beach Contractors.
Just doing a casual research on the numbers here of the parts and the installation for this particular dock system, I'm coming up with more like $40,000. So I would love to see the breakdown that you have access to at some point, if that's possible, to see how we get to $80,000, because it's a big number.
Certainly. One of the considerations that went into the project is the unique location of the launch systems. You have similar applications. This product has been installed in other parks in Nova Scotia. Shuby Park has one of these accessible Easy Dock launch systems, as well as a park in Clare. And their applications are not in a tidal environment. So Miller Point Peace Park, as many may be aware, is along the LaHave River, and you have tidal action that influences the water levels. And so in order for the launch to be usable at all tide levels, it has to stay within the water at all times. So to account for that, we needed an extensive section of dock to be able to extend out into the water course to get to the launch system at all of those water elevations. So that was one of the factors to be able to supply and install that 100 feet of wharf system to get to the launch itself.
Thank you for that extra clarification.
Councillor Smith.
Can you just speak a little bit about what makes the system accessible?
Absolutely. So the system is, we've selected the product that has 2 launch channels. So you come onto the floating platform, and there's a transfer bench. So you can be used by 2 individuals, 2 sides of your launch. And it's a stepped bench to allow them to move from whether it be any sort of walker or mobility device or a chair onto the transfer bench and then slide down at different levels till you get to your kayak level. And it has railings in the launch, so think of it like a chute that slopes down into the water, so you can seat yourself in your kayak and then you use the handrails attached to pull yourself out into the water, and then you're out and able to start to paddle from there.
That's great. I just, this morning, I was talking to someone who said that they missed their kayaks because they said they were able to get in, but not so much getting out was the problem. So
Yeah.
very happy to be able to tell people that this is will be available.
Someone put the motion on the floor related to this, please. Councillor Bell?
Would you entertain one more question before
Oh,
you do
yes,
that?
of
please?
course.
Thank you. This Eagle Bench contractors that are doing this, did the plan show side mooring anchors? Because I know with just the tidal levels, the other consideration I have, and people like the yacht club experience hurricanes and tidal tropical storms maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And that tends to move objects where they shouldn't be. So did your plan or schematics show that as a consideration?
Yes, those will be installed as well. And I should note that the launch system will be installed seasonally and removed for the winter and stored.
Would you like to propose then the motion?
To Mayor McLean Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council award the contract for the supply and installation of an EZ Docks accessible kayak launch and dock system at Miller Point Peace Park to Eagle Beach Contractors Limited in the amount of $88,433 excluding HST. I so move.
And a seconder for the motion, please? Seconded by Councillor Smith. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Oikel.
I was just wondering when this, once this has been, if this gets approved, when will it be installed?
The contractor is on standby, waiting decision from council, and they'll be ready to start right away.
Oh, wonderful.
All those in favor of the motion signify by raising their hand. Those opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. We will move to 10.1, which are the recommendations and motions to come forward from the Finance Committee, which met last week. And for those that may be watching online or in the gallery, there was, at our Finance Committee meeting on May 6th, there was detailed discussion about the recommendations that are going to come forward today. Ms. Payne, are you coming forward to make any comment or, okay? I'll just give a couple of comments before we go to the motions. we will look, the recommendations coming forward from Finance Committee are around the community recreation capital grants and the annual operating and major recreation capital grants. And the first one we're going to deal with, and I'll just highlight this and then we'll go to the motions. The first one we're going to deal with is actually adding a recommendation to add money to the budget for capital grants. We budgeted in this year for $24,000, and after only a very short period of time, we're now in the end of May, almost middle of May, a month and a half in, we have $2,150 left in the budget. And with 2 applications waiting potentially for additional funding. So the motion is coming forward to recommend that we increase the budget by $20,000 to allow for any eventualities that may happen in community halls or community locations that may need some help in emergency funding or in some other way, some unforeseen activity that may happen between now and the approval of next year's budget. So that will deal with the addition to the budget, which is around, we're taking it from our general operating reserves. So if we could deal with that first motion, and then I'll make a few comments on the community, on the operating and the major recreation capital grants, just for anyone who's in the gallery and those that were watching. So if we could go to the motion 10.1.1 on the community recreation capital grant, additional funding request. Councillor Moore.
To Mayor McLean-Wall and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Finance Committee and provide up to $20,000 in additional funding to the Community Recreation Capital Grant Program for the 2025-26 fiscal year, and further that it come from the general operating reserves, and I so move.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Burns. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. The next motion we'll deal with is our annual operating and major recreation capital grants. And again, this is our community support for all of the community groups and organizations within our community that make this such a wonderful place to live. It supports the work of many not-for-profits and many of those volunteers that work so hard to provide many recreation and cultural activities within our community and sporting events. We have, and off the top of my head, I don't know the number, but it's a very lengthy list, and if anyone who's watching or listening wants to look at who gets the grants, these are all public and they're in the agenda and package information from today's meeting. So what we do is approve, each of these are reviewed by staff, and there's a series of criteria that are applied to those applications and a point system allocated to them based on those criteria, and then staff bring that forward to council, and we discussed and looked at these last week, and the recommendation is coming forward with a very lengthy list. So the motion, if someone would like to put the motion on the floor, Deputy Mayor Vino, please.
Thank you. To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council accept the recommendation of the Finance Committee and approve the applications for the 2025-2026 Annual Operating Grant Program in the amount of $99,701 as presented, and I so move.
Do we have a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Reinhardt. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. We'll move on to 10.1.3, which is a fund. Oh.
There's a second motion. There's 2 motions. One and.
No. I only have one. Okay. I have a copy that doesn't have the second motion on it. This motion relates to the capital grants program, which again funds, there's an application process, for bigger projects, not just operating aspects of the organizations that carry out work. And if someone would bring that motion forward, please, from council. Councillor Smith.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Finance Committee and approve the applications for the 2025-2026 Major Recreation Capital Grant Program in the amount of $52,359 as presented, and further, that the approval of the South Shore Multicultural Society application be contingent on securing storage space. I so move.
Do I have a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Vino. And I should say the details of the capital grants are again listed. The grant recipients are listed in the agenda package as well. Is there further discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. We will then move down on the agenda to 10.1.3, which is funding support to Friends of Crescent Beach. Councillor Bell.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Finance Committee and provide $20,000 to support the feasibility and option study regarding climate risk mitigation to the Friends of Crescent Beach, with the funds coming from the Open Space and Sustainability Operating Reserves, and further, that municipal funding be contingent on Friends of Crescent Beach receiving a grant from the Provincial Sustainable Communities Challenge Fund. I so move.
And a seconder for the motion, Councillor Reinhardt. Is there discussion on the motion? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed? The motion is passed with one opposed. We will move to a report from the nominating committee and recommendation. Councillor Oikel.
Certainly. To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendations of the nominating committee and appoint the following as members at large to the Police Advisory Committee. Joseph Boudreau of Pine Grove for a 2-year term ending November 2027, and Larry Hagel of Maplewood for a 3-year term ending November 2028, and I so move. Did I say his name wrong?
Bootlier.
Bootlier, yeah.
Sorry. Joseph Bootlier of Pine Grove.
We have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Brooks. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. Planning Advisory Committee, Proposed Development Agreement, Lot FE1 and McCullough Road, 10.3.1, and Councillor Burns is leaving the meeting for the moment. Ms. Gandy, you're back.
You're going to see me more this evening as well. So. Let me know. Looks. Perfect. Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I'm here this evening to discuss the development agreement for Lot FE1, McCullough Road. It's a land lease community. So just the agenda for this presentation, there will be a very short overview, some of the development agreement criteria, the proposed developments, so the site plan summary, and the work that staff had done to ensure that the development meets the development criteria. And next steps. So just a quick overview, it's the subject property is located on Lot FE1 McCullough Road in Cookville, Nova Scotia. The applicant proposes a modular single-family home cluster development style, configured as at about 23 units. At the time of the application was submitted, it had to go through a development agreement process as it fell under the January 28th first reading for the cluster development. However, since then, Council postponed the first reading and asked staff to provide some revisions. The developer did not have to go through the development agreement process as of Council's decisions, but they decided to stay in a development agreement because they understood that within the nature of their development style, their development will be finished within that 12-month time frame. So they decided to continue with the development agreement. Since then, we had, as part of the development agreement process, we had a public information session on March 19th. Around 15 members of the public attended. It was a good public information session where the developer and planning staff had the chance to answer questions or concerns raised by the public. In addition to that, there was a planning advisory committee that was done on April 24th, where the committee had the chance to discuss the proposed development and also ask questions, ask the engineer or the developer questions regarding the development. So even though they do not need to meet, did not need to meet the regulations that were stated at the time, the development aligns with Section 5.3 of the cluster development and Section 6 of the development agreement process, so meeting access or servicing or phasing of the development, water and sewer services as well. So there's 2 pages to that site plan. The first one shows the 4 phases. As phase 1 shows 5 units in red, phase 2 shows 7 units in purple, the darker purple. Phase 3 shows 5 units in yellow, and phase 4, which you'll see in the second site plan, will be replacing what you currently see at the top near fronting McCullough Road, will be replacing the office and display to 4-unit housing dwellings. In terms of servicing and infrastructure, they do have a municipal water connection, but they will have 2 on-site septic systems. 2 septic fields. One is the one that is shown as septic A, which will sustain 16 units, and then the field B will be for the additional 5 units as well. There's also, I don't know if you can see let me see if I can, yeah, okay. So as you can see here, this is the stormwater retention, the pond, and this is a stream that's located within the site, but we currently do not have any regulations in place to determine a setback. And in addition, no units are located within that 100-year floodplain as well. So planning staff did reach out to several external agencies to receive some feedback, mostly for emergency services such as EHS, RCMP, and fire. According to those departments, the road dimension, which is 6 meters, in addition to ditches on each side, they do meet the requirement of emergency access to the site. Town of Bridgewater mentioned some minimal traffic impact that might be expected. The South Shore School Board, which is not necessarily under the development agreement criteria, but we reached out anyway, said there's no concerns with that type of scale of development. And Public Works did mention there's concerns with closeness of some structures and number of accesses that are on frontage of McCullough Road, but since then the developer had fixed the site plan to meet Department of Public Works criteria and needs. So the site plans that you've just seen are actually meeting the needs of the Department of Public Works. The developer also submitted notification of receipt of the Nova Scotia Environment about the on-site sewage system, so it meets the provincial standards. In addition to that, in terms of environmental impact, planning staff did a desktop analysis to see if there are any species at risk. According to our analysis, there's no species at risk located on that site. I did note that there is a stream located on the site, but currently we do not have any land use regulations that can require any type of setbacks from the road, like for example, from the road to the stream. So currently we do not have that, so we couldn't do anything about that in terms of that. The public engagement, as I mentioned, it was a really good public engagement. It was more of a meet and greet, welcome to the community, rather than we don't want that type of development happening in our community. Most of the comments that were raised during the information session were mostly comments about surrounding uses and not necessarily how that specific site will be used. Some residents did talk about the minimizing any flooding that might occur due to tree falling into the stream, or whether there will be some green space in that development, which will be where the septic fields are located. And also in terms of street lighting, which the developer did mention that part of the development they do intend to have some street lighting just to increase safety. So that was where the major comments that were discussed during that meeting. These are the steps currently where we did most of the steps, and now today council can decide to declare whether their intent is to enter or not to enter into a development agreement. If council declares their intention of entering into a development agreement, we will have a public hearing at one point, and then there will be the final decision with a 14-day appeal period. If no appeals will be made, the application will be approved. These are just some conclusions. Again, it meets the statement of provincial interest regarding housing because it increases affordable housing in this area. Also in terms of council's strategic points, it increases affordable housing in a serviced area, but also in close proximity to goods and services, so access to employment, access to Walmart or other shopping nearby, so makes things more walkable, especially to that nature of development. So again, economic development, climate change, having more units on one lot increases density and reduces sprawl. We do confirm as staff that the developer met all the development agreement criteria, and PAC did provide a positive recommendation to council, as you can see on the screen. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Questions? Councillor or Deputy Mayor Vino, and then Councillor Smith.
Yeah. I don't have a question, just a comment that whether it was the way you prepared it or not, it seems like the process really worked, and a developer was really willing to address any concerns and has everything in a row. I hope all of our future projects go as smooth as this. They probably won't, but it's really good to see something work out, and the benefit will be for future residents to live there.
I'm sorry I missed the information session because I have so many information questions, but I'll try to limit it since we have a long meeting. I do have a question around cluster development regulations and conservation design that's in it's like part of those regulations that will encourage conservation design. And we haven't really talked about that. And I'm just wondering, how does it come out in the development agreement process that it's encouraged?
That's a good question. I can just say that it's not necessarily part of the cluster development regulations, but maybe Reed can talk about it from a cluster development side of things, not necessarily to that specific development, but yeah.
Sorry, this is a cluster development though, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
If you're talking specific about that development, conservation design wasn't necessarily taken into consideration due to the nature of that scale of development. It's not a 100 or 200 unit development. In terms of green space, they do provide they do have some green space involved. Yes, it's where the septic fields are, but in terms of that type of development, they do provide that space. And they have that stream over there, so they managed to mitigate any houses in too close proximity to the stream. In addition to that, the developer did mention retention of trees, again, as to their capacity of what they can do with the development that they want to have. But that's something that I can answer in terms of what that development specifically is, not necessarily what the regulations are.
Yeah, just to add to that, the regulations do include policy to encourage conservation design at the design stage. Al is correct that that particular site is challenging in that it's not very big in terms of looking at conservation design type development. And the reasoning that it is an encourage language in that is that because you can only really kind of require that style if you restrict it, and basically through restricting it elsewhere even further, you encourage people to do this as their only option. So the only case that we're really aware of where there's a requirement to do conservation subdivision is in HRM. And the way that they do that is they basically say you can't do subdivision in this area unless it's by conservation style design. And there are many, many guidelines that go along with that. So basically they had to create very, very strict regulations and then loosen them a little bit. And by loosening them a little bit, then that gives people an avenue that they have to do conservation style design. So we don't necessarily have that ability to do that because there's not that ability to restrict development to that degree and force people into the process. And I think when we're looking at larger sites, particularly more rural sites that don't have servicing, that's where conservation style design would be more practical, and we would certainly want to sit down with someone and encourage them to look at that type of development.
Yep. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just very, very quickly, affordability comes up. How are we defining affordability in this case? Just wondering if you have details on that.
Well, I'm not the developer, but in nature, modular homes are usually more affordable than other types of houses. So in terms of that retrospect, it does increase the affordability in this area.
You shouldn't feel cut off, Councillor Smith, if you have other questions.
Well, the last question I had is around the large trees, like the retention of, I think in the report, it specifically said large trees that people were concerned about. And is there anything that we can do at the municipal level through development agreement or to really work with developers in order to retain some of those trees? Because especially with all the development happening around here, we're increasingly losing trees and the systems, the ecosystem services that they provide in terms of cooling and other things.
I guess the short answer is that yes, that's potentially something that we, as a municipality, you do have the ability, council does have the ability. The development agreement process essentially is a negotiation, but we do want to have policies in place that guide that so that there's a certainty for developers to know what are the goalposts. There isn't a really kind of complete, I would say, framework when it comes to that issue in particular. I think if we were talking about maybe species at risk or maybe some environmental particular elements, that would be key to some of these, and those typically go hand in hand. Like if we're looking at, old growth stands or hemlock trees and things like that, like there'd be often different species and things there that would be at risk, actually, and then there could be those environmental elements could be looked at in designing a site plan. So yes, but I think that there's not a, we need the policy kind of framework, I think, to really look at some of that in more detail.
Similar to your answer, even though it's not about vegetation, but similar to the stream, if there's no setback, if there's not policy in place that mandates a certain setback of development from that water body, then we can, even though it would be ideal to have that, we can't really mandate or request that to happen. So the policy framework is key to, in a way, work together with the development agreement to get the best result.
So to that point, those will be points that we'll hope have a good discussion around when we come back with the policy around lake shores, waterways, and drinking water, which is coming up later this month. So you can raise those questions again, Councillor Smith. Is there any other questions for Ella before we get the motion on the floor? Would someone put the motion on the floor? Councillor Bell.
To Mayor McLean Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council accept the recommendation of the Planning Advisory Committee and give notice of its intention to enter into a development agreement with J-Lin Enterprises Limited for the development of a land lease cluster development located at Lot FE1, McCullough Road, PID number 60709-383, and further, that council set a public hearing for June the 10th, 2025 at 5 p.m. I so move.
And a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Vino. Any discussion, further discussion on the motion? Councillor Reinhardt.
Thanks. Could you put the plan back up? Is that possible?
The first one or the second one? There's two phases, so that's like for the upper units located on McCullough Road. The
I think
closer.
either one for
This one?
is fine, yeah.
Okay.
So how close are the nearest units to the stream?
To the stream.
Yeah.
I would say we didn't really measure that because we don't have policy in place, so to check that out, but I would say around 15 meters-ish. There's a road, a 6-meter road in between, and you can see already there's a distance there. So I would say like the closest ones are around 15 meters.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Could you just raise your hands, please? Those in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried unanimously. We'll move to 10.3.2. Councillor Burns will resume his seat. And this is a proposed amendments to Osprey Village Secondary Planning Strategy and Land Use Bylaw. Again, these are coming forward as recommendations from the Planning Advisory Committee. And this is updating the strategy as it exists and where we sit. A couple of things that need to be sorted out. Remnants of the past as we move forward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm here tonight to relay the recommendations made by PAC pertaining to Osprey Village, specifically to conduct first reading of bylaw 020F and bylaw 021I, which would amend the Osprey Village Secondary Planning Strategy document and Land Use Bylaw document, respectively. This is following the recommendations made by the Planning Advisory Committee, or the PAC, on April 24th. So just a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. So an overview of the three specific recommendations made by the PAC. We'll then go into a bit more detail about the recommendations for each area that will be affected by the proposed amendments, followed by the next steps and a question period. So on April 24th, the PAC concluded their meeting by making 3 recommendations. One is to permit lower density residential development on 4 unserviced industrially zoned lots along Harold Wynot Road. 2, to rezone a vacant municipally owned lot near Alley Champlain Drive from being institutional zone to general commercial zone to enable mixed use development. And finally, the last recommendation was to rezone a small vacant parcel along Pine Grove Road that has several development constraints and rezoning this from high-density residential to open space to protect its natural features. So this is the current zoning map of Osprey Village. As you can see all the different zones that exist in the planned area, as well as the 3 specific areas that would be affected by the proposed amendments. So you have I can maybe turn on my laser pen here. So you have area 1 here along Harold Wynot Road. These are the 4 properties that are currently zoned light industrial. You have this rectangular property in the institutional zone that's owned by the municipality that's currently vacant. And last, we have the 3rd area along Pine Grove Road that is currently zoned high-density residential. So going into the specific background behind these 3 areas and the recommendations that were made. So going first with Area 1, the 4 properties are along Harold Wynot Road. They're zoned as light industrial. However, based on past development interests, there does seem to be potential for residential use. However, currently, the way the land use bylaw is written, the only way that residential development would be possible would for it to follow the high-density residential requirements, which is to have a minimum of 25 units for every hectare on the property. This is quite difficult since this area of Osprey Village is unserviced, so it'd be quite difficult to have this level of development to happen there, which led to the first recommendation by PAC, which is to amend the land use bylaw to remove this high-density residential requirement to these 4 PIDs specifically, and to allow lower levels of residential development to be possible. And so this is these are the 4 specific PIDs that would be exempt from this high-density residential requirement. So yeah, that's Area 1. And then we have Area 2. It's the rectangular property, currently zoned institutional. It is vacant, and with the growth that we are seeing in Osprey Village, it has potential for commercial and residential use. However, as it is zoned institutional, its current permitted uses are largely restricted to institutional uses. And so this led to the second recommendation from PAC, which is to rezone this undeveloped property that is owned by the municipality to be rezoned from institutional to general commercial. And this is a visual representation of what the zoning map would look like upon the amendment happening. So as you can see on the left here, it's currently zoned institutional. It would be rezoned to general commercial or GC. So the zoning map is tied to the land use bylaw document. So for this zoning change to happen, the land use bylaw document would need to be amended. In addition, the institutional zone falls under the community designation of the future land use map. This map is tied to the secondary planning strategy, and so the designation would have to also change from being community to enterprise, which is what the general commercial zone falls under. And so due to this change also being required, if the amendment were to go through, the secondary planning strategy document would also have to be amended. And finally, we have Area 3, which is the small triangular property along Pine Grove Road. It's currently zoned as high-density residential, but based on past studies, there are several development constraints. Firstly, the size of the property is smaller, as well as the soil type makes it quite difficult for any kind of development to happen. And so this led to the third recommendation from PAC, which is to rezone the property from the high-density residential zone to the open space zone. And much like Area 2, this is a visual representation of how the zoning map would change based on the amendments. So we have the, just put out my laser pointer pen again. Yeah, we would have this triangular property currently in orange. R3, or high-density residential, would be changed to open space, or OS. Again, changes to the zoning map would require the land use bylaw document be amended. As well, the high-density residential zone falls under the residential designation of the future land use map, which would have to change to the community designation, which the open space zone would fall under. And this would require the secondary planning strategy document to also be amended. So as part of the amendment process, several stakeholders were consulted to understand the environmental and servicing implications, among other planning implications. Their detailed responses can be found in the agenda report. As well, the following table shows which considerations were satisfied by consulting with these external and internal agencies. And so as you can see in this table here, certain implications like the impact on natural environment, adequacy of municipal services, adequacy of traffic, street networks, those kinds of things were taken into consideration, and the appropriate agencies were consulted. So with all of this said, staff would like to make the following recommendations to council. One is for council to accept the recommendations of the PAC regarding the Osprey Village amendments by conducting the first reading of bylaw 020F, which is the bylaw to amend the Osprey Village secondary planning strategy, as well as to conduct first reading of bylaw 021I, which is the bylaw to amend the Osprey Village land use bylaw document. In addition to conducting first reading, council must also set a time for a public hearing following the first reading. We recommend setting the date and time for June 10th at 5:30 p.m. for a public hearing to coincide with the first council meeting of the new month. So just as a final review of the steps taken so far, as well as the subsequent steps for this amendment process, council originally directed staff to review the proposed amendments with the PAC back in January 14th. A public information session was then held for residents to be notified of the proposed amendments and to take questions. This was on February 5th. Following this, the PAC met twice, once on February 20th and again on April 24th to deliberate and make their recommendations to council. So now we're here on May 13th. So once council does conduct first reading, a public hearing will be held for the public to voice their opinions and concerns about the proposed amendments. And following the feedback received from the public hearing, council can make a final decision on the amendments with the second reading. So yeah, that's everything from me, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that concise presentation. We appreciate that tonight, particularly. Are there questions from Councillor Reinhardt?
Thanks. I have a question about the open space designation. It says that permitted developments for open space are multi-use trails, parks, or parking lots. Is that correct? Okay. To me, those are like a parking lot and a park are very different things. And I think it's really important to preserve some green space in that area where there's so much development happening. So is there any way to make sure that it goes in that direction and not the parking lot direction?
Yeah, so the land use bylaw does allow for parking. So depending on what gets built there, or doesn't even have to be this. It could be another open space zone. Sometimes when you build parks, you need to have adequate parking, off-street parking, so it does allow for the parking. This lot in particular is owned by the municipality, so even though you're making the zoning, if you make the zoning change, any decision on the development of that parcel is still within the control of council. So if you just wanted to keep it natural, council can do that. If they didn't want a parking lot there, like that will be the decision of council at the time that should council decide to develop that.
I think it is a challenging piece of land to develop. No one has gotten it yet. Other questions? Councillor Smith.
Just following that, I noticed the recommendation from the rec department about rezoning Area 3 as open space. But they also noted that areas encouraging multi-unit housing developments and commercial business should require a percentage of green space in the design plans of the development. I'm just wondering where we're at with that and what are kind of the levers for us to do that.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's not in these set of amendments, so you'd have to, if we were going to obligate developers to do that, like we'd have to put that in one of our land use bylaws to be able to implement that. When staff do have the conversations with the developers, we, even though something might not be a regulation, like we'd always talk about best practices and may encourage, them to do green spaces and open spaces as part of their development for their residents, even though it's not a mandatory type of thing.
Do you have another question, Councillor Smith? You have questions now that are going to be ready for when we discuss the policy on municipal land use planning. Other questions? Would someone put the motion? Oh, Councillor Burns? Question or the motion?
The motion.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Planning Advisory Committee and conduct first reading of bylaw 020F amendments to the Osprey Village Secondary Planning Strategy 2025 and bylaw 021I amendments to the Osprey Village Land Use Bylaw 2025, and further, that council set a public hearing for June 10th, 2025 at 5:30 p.m.
Seconder for that, Councillor Moore. Discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We will move to Planning and Development, 11.1, and Ella will come back for Cluster Development Regulations, second reading, 11.1.1. Yeah, and Councillor Oikel has declared a conflict of interest, and she's stepping out of the council circle, and we'll go to Ella.
I think it's up to council to read the motion, and
okay.
Staff has presented at the public hearing.
Okay.
So if there's any additional questions that were not asked
Okay.
at that point, we will
Okay.
be happy to engage.
Okay. So perhaps we could start with the motion. Deputy Mayor Vino, please.
Thank you. To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council conduct second reading of bylaw 035C, amendments to the municipal planning strategy, and bylaw 049A, amendments to the municipal-wide land use bylaw as presented at the May 13th, 2025 public hearing, which includes new sections outlining regulations for cluster developments, and I so move.
Seconded by Councillor Bell. Is there any questions that need to be asked? Councillor Smith.
Not so much a question, but just asking to reiterate with the extension of the non-conforming clause. It was very complicated when it was explained to us that this would not create a huge opening for more cluster developments than are already on the books. And I just wonder if we could have that repeated just before we finally sign off on this, these regulations with the new date at 2026.
I'll ask Tom
you.
to speak to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So with respect to the proposed amendment, the two areas that we looked at, one was an extension of the date of December 31st, 2025 to December 31st, 2026, and that was for phased development condominiums only. So all of the other provisions would have remained the same. The only change was at the request of a particular developer who indicated that with an extension of 1 year beyond what was in the original draft, they would be able to do what they described as a better development with better results. And so that was limiting the change. We did look at and try to come up with the best information that we could to see what was in the pipe, coming down the pipe as it relates to phased development condominiums. So the bylaw has been in place since first reading, and any application for a phased development condominium that came to us with a request for a statutory declaration, prior to first reading, we would indicate nothing. After first reading would indicate that there was a bylaw. And the last one we received was from the developer who requested the change. We've also been told that Pat Cassidy, who is the leading lawyer for phased development condominiums in Nova Scotia, has indicated he hasn't done any more beyond the ones that we're aware of. So he didn't tell us that directly, but I have no reason to believe that the information is incorrect. So we think we have been diligent in trying to ensure that we didn't make a change that would put the gates wide open. So we believe on a balance of probabilities that it's unlikely that there's other applications coming. The other change that was put in place was to create a timeline for non-phased development condominiums that are cluster development to get building permits. And so the building permit timeline was extended also to December 31st, 2026. So we could see a lot of those. But that's a new opening because it didn't exist before. But those building permits would have to be issued prior to the December 31st, 2026, which means that they would have to plan their development and get the building permits issued for all the buildings they wanted to do in that timeline, which is quite a threshold.
Other questions? The motion's on the floor, and we have the motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. Good job, planning. And to all the councillors and staff who've worked really hard on this, and it's been a long process, but here we are. We will move on to 11.2.1, which is South Shore Public Libraries, and in the gallery we have Ashley Nunn Smith, who's the chief librarian, and We have a motion before us today, and I am going to ask Councillor Smith to bring that forward.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council provide a letter to the Honorable Dave Ritzie, Minister of Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage, in support of the South Shore Public Library's request for the province of Nova Scotia to revisit the current public library funding formula.
Do we have a seconder for them? Seconded by Councillor Burns. And if I can just speak to this, both myself and Councillor Smith met with the chief librarian, and I know there's been ongoing discussions with our staff and the librarian and the library staff about some possibilities of working together. But it was very clear in the meeting that we had with the librarian that money is a big issue, and money to pay people an adequate wage to keep them from leaving and reward them for the service that they provide is much needed. And this is a concerted effort by libraries across the province to advocate through the municipal funders, organizations, to request this. This was brought to the floor at Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, so it was clearly an issue that was given good airing. And I think it's one we need to support. I think the libraries are an important part of our community. They offer much more than books, and we need to recognize that if we're going to continue to have this in our community, we need to support it, and we need to look for other ways that we can utilize the resource that we have to serve our community in even more ways than perhaps what we are currently doing. So I'm speaking very much in favor of this. Is there any other comments? All those in favor signify by raising their hands.
Oh, she didn't make the motion yet.
Oh, yeah. Motion is carried unanimously. Okay. Our next is the nuisance bylaw, 11.2.2, and I expect it's Tom that's leading the charge on this, so we'll turn it over to you. I think at this point what is important, we've had public input this evening. We also received two emails. We've received three emails, but one was publicly addressed to Ms. Meisner and one other resident in Hebville. All of a sudden, Huxley. Ms. Huxley has provided us with input on the proposed bylaw. These public concerns have been circulated to all councillors, and we heard from Mr. Himmelman as well. So I'm going to turn it to Tom to maybe summarize and address some of the concerns, and then we'll open it up for council members who've now heard public input, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mayor. By way, the mayor's referred to it as a summary. I have 5 pages of notes to refer to, so by summary, it's longer than you might anticipate. But what I've tried to do was address all of the various issues that have been brought up previously or recently. So I'd like to start by just acknowledging, as Mr. Himmelman pointed out, there is a criminal code provision, section 430, mischief, which provides that everyone commits mischief who willfully obstructs, interrupts, or interferes with the lawful use, enjoyment, or operation of property. So there is a criminal code provision that can cover instances that we are capturing in the draft nuisance bylaw. In discussions with the RCMP, what they indicated was they felt that often a criminal code charge for what they considered to be quote-unquote nuisances was an overly aggressive response because of the implications of a criminal code conviction. Because if you're charged with mischief and if you're convicted, you get a criminal record. and that criminal record can impact employment and it can impact travel. And so what the RCMP supported was an additional tool that they could use to address nuisance activities that was less than a criminal code offense. And so that's the perspective from the RCMP on the value of this as a tool. Now, the term nuisance is a legal term, and it generally refers to an act or practice that interferes with another's right to enjoyment of their property. Nuisance is, in essence, its own area of law. There's public nuisance, there's private nuisance, there's courses on nuisance under torts in law school. So it has a very specific legal meaning that courts in particular would be aware of, but also prosecutors and to an extent the police. So while the term may appear very broad, in actuality it's fairly well defined. Nuisance activities are actually referenced in the MGA. So just a quick review of Section 172 of the Municipal Government Act, which provides that council can make bylaws for municipal purposes respecting, amongst other things, nuisance activities and things that in the opinion of council may be or may cause nuisances, including noise, weeds, burning, odors, fumes, and vibrations, and without limiting the generality of the foregoing, there's a host of things you can do. Now, as been pointed out in a number of the issues that have been brought up by the residents, it is open to council to deal with noise on its own. And noise can be dealt with by way of a decibel meter, and you've seen that, and it was referenced in the public input, that some municipal units tie noise to a decibel meter reading. Where you see that is often in towns or villages where the police can respond relatively quickly to get that decibel reading. And it is the decibel reading taken by typically the police that forms the basis of the offense. Now, other bylaws, and in particular, one of the ones I'm familiar with is New Minas, issued by the County of Kings, but only applying in the village of New Minas. It has noise bylaw that includes both decibel units and just general noise that you can hear at a certain distance or inside houses that are not the property that the noise is generating. So there's lots of different ways that this could be dealt with. The incident that brought this primarily to council for discussion and brought it to the attention involved not only noise, but noxious odors, which were intentionally placed on the property line of the neighboring property with the specific intent to disturb them. In addition, they played loud, obnoxious music all day long. So when we were drafting this, the things that we were thinking about were how do we ensure that we don't unintentionally create gaps which would allow this kind of activity to continue without being an offense. And so that's part of the reason why we didn't limit it to time. Because it could have been that council said, after 11 p.m. and before 6 a.m., you must be quiet or not make too much noise. But we were actually dealing with a situation where the music was played all day. It wasn't in the evening. It was all day long while they were at work. They put the obnoxious music on and left. And the neighbor had to deal with that all day. And so the bylaw intentionally is designed so that the RCMP have a tool to respond to what generally would be regarded as pretty extreme instances of nuisance. Now, one of the things that we've also looked into was how are we going to enforce this? Because we don't have bylaw enforcement officers separately on staff. So we rely upon the RCMP to do this. And the RCMP were very clear that they will enforce the bylaw, but in the hierarchy of what they do, a nuisance bylaw is going to come below a criminal code offense. And so they couldn't guarantee that they would be on site to respond to the charge. So they couldn't necessarily guarantee that they could themselves be a witness to the offense and be able to give firsthand evidence on what they experienced by way of vision or smell or vibration or light. So we had to consider what's the standard or what's the threshold that we're going to want to put on this, because we didn't want to create a situation where one neighbor complains and then the neighbor retaliates and they complain too, because some bylaws have that a neighbor or a resident could complain, and that's proof that the neighborhood was disturbed. And we see that in the dog bylaw. So the MGA provides that it's an offense for a dog to persistently disturb the quiet of the neighborhood. And it also provides that evidence that one person is disturbed by a barking dog is prima facie evidence that the whole neighborhood is disturbed. So in considering that, we thought one isn't enough. Two is more likely the threshold that we should put in place. And so then we started to think, well, those two people can't be in the same household, because that's just like the same as saying one person. And they have to be on separate properties. And we thought that having them in separate properties was important, so that's demonstrating at least outside of a neighboring property. And then we looked at what is the neighborhood. And because this was happening on a lake, we knew that it wasn't only the people next door that were being annoyed, it was people on the other side of the lake. So then we said, well, the neighborhood isn't just restricted to what you would consider as houses or properties on the same street. It's anyone within sight or distance, sight or hearing, because those are the two things that would likely travel. But it's including but not limited to them. So it could be other things, but we specifically identified those things. And so those are some of the thoughts that went into how we got to where we were. And then we looked at, well, what are the exemptions that we want to put in place? And so there were common activities that we wanted to exclude that would never amount to nuisance as long as they're appropriate. Because everything goes back to a reasonableness standard. So the standard in interpreting any bylaw, any legislation actually, is the reasonable person. What would a reasonable person, generally informed of the situation, what would they think? How would they interpret what's being put in place? And so when you took all of that into account, we come up with some exemptions that were for very community recreation activity, businesses, and then we got more specific because we had concerns expressed from specific industries that they didn't want to get caught in an alleged violation of the bylaw. So we looked at forestry, which is one of our primary industries, and we know that it's loud, and it has to be loud, and it's going to be happening early in the morning, and we know that too. And then we looked at farming practices. Now, farming practices already have their own standard of protection as long as they fall within the Farm Practices Act. They can't be charged with nuisance, but not every quote-unquote farm falls under the farm practices standard. So we said, if you fall within the definition of farming operations or standard farming practices, then you're going to be exempted as well. But again, it all goes down to the reasonableness of the activity or the appropriateness of the activity. And so we thought that we carved out a pretty good set of exemptions. Now, if it turns out that those exemptions are too broad, council can change them after we see how the bylaw is interpreted. If council believes that more exemptions are required for certain industries, the deputy mayor brought up the idea of the fishing industry. Now, generally, if a business is operating appropriately, taking into account how the business operates, it already has an exemption. And so council didn't give direction to make a specific exemption for fishing operations, but council could have. And if it turns out that there's a question at some point in the future, council can amend the bylaw on notice to include additional exemptions. So if we look at everything that has been taken place, I think that The bylaw itself, the prohibition is unreasonably disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. So in essence, the bylaw is fairly straightforward. If you're unreasonably disturbing the peace of the neighborhood, then you've committed an offense. When you look at how you get there, then you have to look at proof of the offense. So that's where we look at, in order to prove that a person has unreasonably disturbed the peace of the neighborhood, there must be complainants who will give a statement regarding what I would refer to as a nuisance, but it's the subject activity that is causing the resident to not be able to enjoy the peace of their property. And that's where the evidence that two or more residents occupying at least two different properties are disturbed by the activity. And that is prima facie evidence that the activity has unreasonably disturbed the peace of the neighborhood. Now, in the current draft that's in the document, the word prima facie is not included. And it was taken out because there is a movement afoot to try to make bylaws easier to read by removing Latin. But when you do that, you potentially lose something. So the MGA actually includes in it that the bylaw and the prosecution of the bylaw, evidence that one person is disturbed or offended is prima facie evidence that the public or neighborhood is disturbed. We went beyond the threshold in the MGA to provide for two people, but the prima facie language is important because that is an indicator to people with law degrees, like Edgar and I, that it's a rebuttable presumption. Now, it was a rebuttable presumption without those words there, but it very clearly includes a rebuttable presumption when you put the words in. And so that means that if two people that are living in two different spots give a statement to the RCMP that they were both individually and separately disturbed by the nuisance activity, then that's rebuttable evidence, but it's evidence that the neighborhood was disturbed. And that's the key to the charge. So that is where the RCMP must have reasonable grounds to believe that the offense has been committed. The RCMP gets to that threshold by two people, both in different properties, saying that they were disturbed, and that is prima facie evidence that the neighborhood has been disturbed. Now, if the offense is going to court, then the judge has to make that determination. But it's not necessary that the matter goes to court because you can do a voluntary payment. It's an automatic conviction, just like a speeding ticket. But if the resident didn't experience the activity and can't say that they were disturbed by the activity, then they won't qualify as one of two people to form the basis of the offense. And that second person can't rely upon the evidence of the first person. So it couldn't be that person A says, I was disturbed, and I told person B that I was disturbed, and so person B said, I was also disturbed. The information coming from person B to the RCMP would have to be firsthand evidence that they experienced the activity and were annoyed or upset by it, and that would trigger the charge. So if two or more residents occupying at least two different properties are disturbed by the activity, that's prima facie evidence that the activity is unreasonably disturbed the quiet of the neighborhood, but that's rebuttable. The clause creates a standard of proof or a burden of proof so that the testimony of two residents occupying two different properties is accepted as being enough evidence to create a rebuttable presumption that the matter asserted is true, i.e. that the activity unreasonably disturbed the peace of the neighborhood. Now, if they enter a not guilty plea, the court must still be satisfied on the evidence that it accepts from the people that testified that the offense has been committed. So it's not necessarily enough for someone to say, I was disturbed. If it's in trial, they get examined by the Crown, and they can be questioned by legal counsel or self-represented people. And the court makes a finding of credibility on evidence in every instance. And the court can accept or reject all, some, or none of the evidence given. but it is up to the judge to make a determination that all the essential elements of the offense have been proven by the Crown beyond a reasonable doubt. And so that's the last level of protection that is in place for the person that is charged with the offense. So it's not enough for two people just to say it happened. If the subject of the offense pleads not guilty, it has to go all the way through a criminal process in provincial court with a judge at the end of the day making a finding of guilty or not guilty. It's actually a slower criminal process than the criminal code, because in the thresholds of prosecuting information, the federal Crown goes first, provincial Crown doing provincial offenses goes second, and then the Crown doing municipal offenses goes third. So only if there's enough time left in the day. So the offending activity that started a lot of this discussion took approximately 3 years to make it through the provincial court as a criminal code offense. It's unlikely it would be quicker as a municipal offense, so the process is slow and it's imperfect, but it is how the system works. The benefit of a summary offense ticket, which is what this would be, is there is the option of an automatic conviction, or you just challenge the amount of the fine. So those are generally not available for criminal code offenses. But even if a resident is, even if there's a complaint that someone has done something that is a nuisance, the first reaction of the RCMP is not to charge. Our goal is compliance. And so the RCMP would respond, and they have 6 months to lay a charge. So the RCMP never have to lay the charge on the first day of the offense, and the RCMP never have to be witness to an offense. There's 6 months to lay a summary offense charge under the Summary Proceedings Act and the Criminal Code. And so when the RCMP get the complaint, their first response is to try to get compliance. So you inform the resident, who may not know that there's a bylaw that they've offended. You tell them what the offending nature of the activity was, and you seek to get them to change their ways. And the RCMP did this in the instance that initiated all this discussion on a number of occasions before they laid the criminal code charge, because they were reluctant to lay a criminal code charge because of the implications that could have. So the same process takes place. If a resident that is the subject of the complaint refuses and continually acts in a way that disturbs their neighbors, then the RCMP could lay a charge. And they would lay it through the neighborhood nuisance bylaw, assuming there's two people living in two different residences that can testify that they were annoyed by what's happened. So in the whole context, like we do believe that we've created a bylaw that meets the goal of council in a way that is reasonable, and that would have a high likelihood of success if it was challenged in court through just the normal process. Now, one of the issues there was a question about definitions of things like recreational activity. Well, it's a principle of legal construction and drafting that you don't define words that are going to carry the ordinary meaning that they would have in ordinary life. So we've defined certain phrases because we wanted specifically to say what they meant, so appropriateness, for instance. Neighborhood is an expanded definition beyond what normally you would think of as your neighborhood, because this could be across the lake, for instance. But we wouldn't put in definitions for terms that have an ordinary meaning because they just carry with it the ordinary meaning. So that's why you don't see everything defined. And so one of the other issues is the bylaw doesn't deal with false complaints. And it doesn't, because false complaints are a criminal code offense, not a municipal offense. And so if someone's making a false statement that accuses some other person of having committed an offense, or reporting that an offense has been committed when it has not been committed, that's considered to be public mischief, and it's an offense under Section 140 of the Criminal Code. That's a provincially enforced criminal code offense. So we don't have to provide for that in our bylaw, because the criminal code already provides for people that make false reports to the RCMP. There's also some suggestion that the guidelines for environmental noise and assessment apply to activities of residents in the context of how municipalities operate. So if you look at those, the guidelines for environmental noise and assessment, it's stated in them, right at the beginning, that they apply to activities that are regulated under the activities designation regulations and are designed to assist proponents who are required under the Environment Act to undertake environmental noise measurement and assessment activities. So those guides don't apply to what we're talking about here, because the activities that we're talking about are not prescribed activities under the Environment Act and the designated regulations, or the activities designated regulations. What we're talking about is activities that are intentionally done by people that are designed to negatively impact and annoy their neighbors. We don't believe that this bylaw is going to be used a lot because we haven't gotten a lot of complaints about these activities. The frustrating thing that council had expressed was when these complaints come in, we can't do anything. We have no bylaw that we can point to, that we can say to the residents that are coming in to see council members or to see staff, what can you do? And the response, you have to go to the RCMP and see if they'll charge under the criminal code, generally wasn't being well received by people. Because the RCMP were saying, to do that through the criminal code is a bit heavy-handed, and we're not going to be able to be there to hear it ourselves, and so we're going to have to rely upon the testimony and the witness statements of the people around them, and generally people are they're reluctant to get involved. So things have to get fairly bad before a neighbor is going to engage with the RCMP, because they know if there's a not guilty plea, they have to go to court and testify, or the charge is dismissed. So it's sort of, so I'm actually got through this more quickly than I thought I would. In a sort of roundabout, indirect way, we think we've created a bylaw that reasonably achieves the desire of council as it was expressed, and with the intentional elimination of things that council could have done, like noise, like decibel meters, and created a scheme that we think is quite workable. Now, if it's not, if we find that there's an offense and there's a charge and it's challenged in court and something happens that doesn't go the way that we think it should, we can rewrite the bylaw. But the offense in itself is simply unreasonably disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. That's the prohibition. And the person that's charged is the person that does that. And the way you prove that is to have at least two people that can say that they experienced it and they live in different properties. And it's neighborhood, but it's an expansive definition of neighborhood that relies upon the ability of the two people to say, I heard it, I experienced it, it annoyed me and interfered with the enjoyment of my property. And so, in essence, that's what we've tried to create. And I think I've spent more time on this bylaw than most bylaws. But the discussion that it's raised has shown considerable public interest in a topic that generally doesn't get a lot of public interest. So I think that through the process, we've actually provided very deep and detailed analysis on how we got to where we arrived at, and maybe even as importantly, why we didn't take other routes that were available to council.
Thank you for Law 101. Except it was deeper than that. I think if there's questions, and the hands are going up, Councillor Moore, and then Councillor Oikel, and then Councillor Reinhardt. We'll go in that order.
Thank you. I appreciate the time that staff have put into this. This was something that was brought up last term, and there's been a change in council, and some of the new councils have inherited this property. And I want to really say I appreciate the work staff put into it. But my problem is that we had one or two incidents of extreme nuisance. and we are painting the whole municipality, which is a rural municipality, not a rural, we have parts that are urban. We do not have no towns in this. We have parts that are urban, but in a rural municipality, it's going to be very hard to tell these people that we're painting them all with the same broad brush. Because what's going to happen is, for one thing, you're going to be putting a couple neighbors against another neighbor that is just having battles all the time anyway. RCMP do not have time for this nuisance, or nonsense, I should say. And the criminal code does cover the extreme incidences. The court system is plugged as it is, and trying to, wait for a court date and tie up the courts for something like this. I really, on the 22nd of April, I voted against this, and I will not be supporting it tonight because of the fact that we are rural, and it's just too hard to paint the whole Lunenburg County with the same broad brush. Thank you.
I had just one resident who brought up cutting their firewood. So would that fall under the forestry, even though they aren't a forestry business?
So it all goes to the reasonableness of the activity,
That's what I thought.
right? And so the question would be whether the reasonable person would conclude that someone cutting their firewood is a nuisance because of probably noise. Now, if they're cutting their firewood at 2 a.m., right, that's different than if they're cutting it at 6 a.m. And so the reasonableness of the activity and the appropriateness of the activity, taking into account the intensity, the frequency, the timing, that all goes into play if the RCMP are asked to determine whether there's an offense. Now, for any instance, if someone complains about their neighbor doing something, generally the RCMP will respond at some point and get there to talk to them about it. But it's the RCMP that have to determine whether they have reasonable grounds to believe an offense has been committed before they lay a charge, right? So you have to keep in mind that there's always that reasonableness element that has to be taken into account.
Thank you. That's what I explained as well, but I just wanted it to be on the record. Thank you.
Councillor Reinhardt and then Councillor Bell.
Thank you. First, I just really want to quickly say thank you to the people who provided public input in the gallery and online, because it did make me go back and review all of the information on this. So it does matter. So thanks for keeping us on our toes. The question I had was about one of the important pieces of this bylaw that you mentioned in our earlier discussion was that there's a timeline between issuing a ticket and then a trial or whatever happens at the end, and that there's an opportunity to resolve things in between. So if you could explain more how that process would work.
Sure. So it's the role of the RCMP to determine whether an offense has been committed and if they deem it appropriate to lay a charge. But because it's a municipal bylaw, we act instead of the Crown. And so we can make a determination at any time to pull the prosecution. And so if it looks like we can get compliance, then we can say, for instance, and you see this a lot in dog bylaw offenses. If you put up a fence so that your dog doesn't run loose, and you show us that your fence is put up, we'll pull the running at large charge because we want compliance, not penalty. And so the same thing here, because you have 6 months to lay the charge from the date of the offense. And so if the RCMP lay the offense, we still have the period of time between when the offense is laid and the trial, if they plead not guilty, to become involved and seek compliance. And that can be at the instigation of the person charged or the complainant, who may say, things have been great. for the last 2 months. I'm not interested in pursuing this anymore, which is them really saying, I'm not going to come to court to support this, in which case we would pull it, either because it's, for either of those two reasons, as long as we're satisfied that the situation has improved, and generally we'd only do that with the consent of the complainants. And so if things go south again, we can lay another charge. You can't charge for the previous offense. Once it's charged and withdrawn, you can't reapply it. But if there's a fresh offense, if it happens again, then we could lay the charge, and maybe that instance we're less likely to pull it because we got burned the first time. So we have a fair amount of discretion during the period of time between the offense, the charge, and the trial to try to get compliance. And then and frankly, even if they're convicted, there's all kinds of ways for people to get the penalties reduced through their Remission of Fines Act. The courts can remove the cost section. So there's, even though we have a fine amount, the court is not bound by our bylaw in what they put out as penalty. So although the numbers may seem high, the likelihood of the court issuing a fine, like I'm not sure if Mr. Hillman was correct, but if it was a $100 fine for the mischief charge, that seems low, but a provincial court could do that. And it's incredibly unlikely that they would ever get default time. Like, there's a whole other process you have to go through for that. More likely, if they got a fine and they didn't pay it, they wouldn't be able to renew their license. That's the like the heavy part that we have, and that's not even our decision. That's the province.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Actually, Mr. McEwen had made some of the points that I wanted to bring forward. I want to speak in favor of this nuisance bylaw. I do think that moving this forward during the same time as we were having discussions with municipal-wide planning may have provided some amount of confusion by some of those not fully paying attention that this was actually two separate issues. But they were two separate issues. I must say that I did not get one single complaint against this nuisance bylaw, except 2 emails that came from non-constituents. I understand that there were a few negative comments on Facebook, but I don't really consider that input. If someone writes me a letter, I read it and I take it into account and give it weight. I see the bylaw as progressive and progress, and progress sometimes invites jealousy. The nuisance bylaw has nothing to do with rights. It has to do with responsibility. We have a responsibility to one another. No one has taken away anyone's rights. We are being asked to shoulder consideration towards others within the neighborhood. Discretion still plays a role. Speeding above the posted speed limit can be considered an offense. However, speed limits is for everyone, rural or urban. However, an officer may use discretion. Therefore, I see an officer not just ruling arbitrarily. Level heads will normally prevail. We will seek compliance, and sometimes a discussion on site will alleviate the problem in most cases. I will say that several people have contacted me and were in favor of what we were proposing, in the fact, and sometimes were surprised that we didn't already have such a policy in place. I ask councillors to be decisive. Right or wrong, make a decision. The road of life is paved with flat squirrels who couldn't make a decision. I don't want to have, well, it's true. I don't want to have additional people come to council and say, what can you do to help me? And we have to tell them, nothing. We have no bylaw, we have no policy. And the times that we were using a criminal offense, that was a heavy handle, a heavy hammer, when we could have did a summary offense ticket through this new policy, which I think is much more reasonable. For those reasons, this is why I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Brooks and then Councillor Smith.
Can I just ask, what is the automatic review time for this bylaw? Is it 5 years that we've set? There is no set time, so we could essentially look at it whenever if it's not working out. Thank
Yes.
you.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I want to echo what a few people have said. I want to echo what Councillor Reinhardt has said, thanking people for all their input. This has generated a lot of input from my residents, and it's interesting just how split it is. And I have to say, you know, I do come down on the side of folks who are desperate for a bylaw like this to be in place because they've had the RCMP come to their neighborhoods and say, we don't have anything that can help at this moment. And the many concerns that have been raised, I have been satisfied by our discussions and research that that the bylaw has considered them and in some fashion dealt with them, the issues. And kind of the last part of what I felt was my due diligence was that I called the deputy mayor today from the municipality of Colchester, Deputy Mayor Lori Sanderson, and just chatted with her about how their nuisance bylaw has been working in reality, and it's been in place since 2021. And really what I wanted to hear, is this being used, weaponized, you know, neighbor against neighbor? And she said that that is not the case, and it's not being overused in the municipality of Colchester, and confirmed what has been said, that, you know, the bylaw does fall fairly low on the priority list of the RCMP. So it's really only available in extreme cases. And if anything, it's underused, not overused. So I really have heard the residents who have spoken to me about their worries about neighbors using it against each other, and by us adding the second neighbor as a witness, and the way that it will be enforced by the RCMP, I would really like to give this bylaw a try and see how it actually works out in reality in our neighborhoods. And I do think, you know, like, most people think we don't have a dog bylaw, you know, because you only really know about it if something extreme happens that you go looking for it. And I think this is the same kind of scenario. In most cases, people are going to seek out other remedies with neighbors. They're going to try and work things out. And it'll be really only when people have exhausted other means that they will call the RCMP. And then, of course, there's all the reasonableness, you know, factors on top of that. So I really feel that we should try this out, but that we should really keep an eye on it to make sure that it's playing out the way that that it's been intended.
Councillor Reinhardt.
Can I ask a question of Councillor Smith through you? Okay. In your conversation with Colchester, I was just wondering if they mentioned if it had worked as a de-escalation or a resolution tactic with, if there's any anecdotal evidence of that.
No, we didn't get into that. I merely, my question was, is it being overused in a vexatious way? And they confirmed that it was not being overused.
Other questions for clarification? Would someone put the motion on the floor, please? Councillor Smith.
To Mayor McLean Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council conduct second reading and adopt bylaw 050 neighborhood nuisance as presented.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Oikol. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion is carried. And the opposing votes were Councillor Moore, Councillor Vino, and Councillor Burns. Thank you. I want to thank those in the gallery, Ms. Meisner and Ms. Werner, and for those that may be watching at home for their input on this. This has generated lots of conversation, discussion. We may not all agree on all the points, but it was really valuable to have the public involved in outlining their concerns and bringing it forward in a way that will remind us as council that this may not be the perfect thing, but as Councillor Smith said, we have something that we can now offer to residents who are faced with this situation. We will monitor it, and if it's needed to be changed, we will do that. And I think that's a commitment that we can make. So again, our thanks to the public. We are going to take a little bit of a break. We are well along in our agenda. I know we have a few items left, but I think we need a little bit of a break. So we'll take 10 minutes and then come back. We'll reconvene our meeting, and we will move to 11.2.3, which is the appointment of Code of Conduct Investigator. Alec, our Deputy CAO, will lead us in this.
Great. So I'll just provide a very short summary of the background.
5 pages.
The Department of Municipal Affairs developed, in collaboration with municipal representatives, model code of conduct. It was included as a requirement via regulations in the Municipal Government Act and had to be adopted by councils in late 2024. This council has done that. One of the requirements, though, is to appoint an independent investigator for complaints received regarding the code of conduct. We had had preliminary discussions at the staff level with other municipalities in Lunenburg County about appointing the same investigator, both for simplicity for residents and also for administrative efficiency, only one report preparation for 5 councils. Along the way, though, the Association of Municipal Administrators published a call for expressions of interest, so they did some pre-qualifications for us. So there were 7 firms that responded to the expression of interest that met the qualifications of the AMA and also didn't have any limitations on the type of investigations that they could do. So we got in touch with each of those and got information about capacity and pricing. Taylor, McClellan, Cochrane had the lowest hourly rate. There's a table of the other ones in your report if you're interested. The rates did vary a bit. Taylor TMC, for example, does have a $250 fee for opening a complaint and then a $200 hourly fee, which was the lowest hourly fee for an actual investigator. Some of the other ones had some lower fees for articling and administrative hours, but the actual investigator billing rates were higher. We've identified no capacity issues and no conflict of interest issues that would prevent them from being appointed as our investigator, and we've offered the same background information to the other councils in Lunenburg County. So that, we expect that some of them will also likely still choose the same investigator, which again we think is a good thing from the public perspective. So we're looking for a motion from council to appoint Taylor McClellan Cochrane, or TMC, as the investigator. And if council does make that motion, we'll put the information on our website as required by the Act.
Would someone put the motion on the floor, please? Councillor Reinhardt.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council appoint Taylor McClellan Cochrane, TMC, as the municipality's Code of Conduct investigator, and I so move.
Do I have a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Oikel. Is there question or discussion? Councillor Oikel.
I just wanted to have it clarified. So it isn't necessarily Taylor. That's not his first name. It is Taylor, McClellan, Cochrane are 3 separate individuals, right? And so it would be a company or what? What?
They're all deceased. It's the name of the law firm.
Okay, it's the name of the law
It's
firm.
the name of the firm,
So the
yes.
name, so it would be anybody within that law firm would be the ones that would be doing it.
Yeah, so
Correct?
they're appointed, and there'll be contact information for the firm. And then they will assign an investigator. The primary contact will actually be Jonathan G. Cumming.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was understood by people listening.
Any other questions? All those in favor of the motion indicate by raising their hands. Motion is carried, and one opposing, Councillor Brooks. We will move on to mayors, deputy mayors, and councillor matters. MJSB update. Is there anything to be reported?
Yes,
Councillor
there is.
Oikel.
On April the 23rd, 2025, we had a virtual meeting. The board approved the award of capital spending for supplies and installation of upgrade security cameras to CONVERGINT. I cannot pronounce it properly, so I spelled it for you. The current security camera system was installed in 2017 with limited camera coverage at the waste site. As well, the current camera system has a lower quality of image and at times will not provide the quality of images or information being sought. Enhancing and upgrading the system will give more reliability and superior quality of images. The new system will provide a more robust coverage area throughout the waste site, providing not only security but safety for our staff and customers. The additional cameras will also help ensure materials are sent to the proper waste streams, increasing division from the landfill and preventing revenue loss. The board approved the award of request for proposals 2025-01 hazardous waste collection and transportation to GFL Environment Services for a one-year term and authorizes staff to extend the contract for one additional year based on the price provided, subject to satisfactory performance, to reduce hazardous waste from entering the municipal solid waste stream and to comply with provincial regulations. For your information, just have to move this up a little bit. The board approved the filing of a term public relations co-op student. Individual municipal councils supported the submission of a provincial capital assistance program funding application to offset a portion of the compost tipping floor replacement project. And a yearly compost giveaway was on May the 10th from 8 until 1 o'clock. And this is my report.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Vino, the Deputy Mayor's report.
Thank you. So the last 2 weeks, I attended the volunteer reception at the Best Western, where we recognized volunteers from all across the district. As well, that week attended the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipality Conference in Truro, the MPS meetings in Parkdale, Maplewood, and the Northfield Fire Hall. And I should also add that there's several other council members that attended all of these events with myself, and agenda briefings and all the committees as assigned. Thank you.
Thank you. The work and discussion for me during the last 2 weeks has been around our municipal planning strategy, and I call it 2.0 process. We had 2 more community meetings in Parkdale Maplewood and in Northfield. These are important meetings and a valuable way to connect with residents, explain what planning is and why it is needed, and to allow people to share their concerns and have questions answered. Thank you to the council who have been supportive and engaged in working with residents and really participating actively at these meetings to help address issues with residents. It's been really, really good to have that level of engagement of all of you with residents outside your own district and working with other councillors. We still have a lot of work to do, but we're learning as we go and adapting the process as we go through. And I think by the time we get through 10 meetings, we'll really have it down to a fine science. While we continue to host meetings throughout the district, we will begin considering the policy areas that provide the framework for the development of the related bylaws. On May 20th, we will consider lake shores and drinking water. On June 17th, we'll discuss agriculture, and July 15th, we'll discuss home-based businesses. So those are the policy pieces that will come forward at policy and strategy for us, and then we'll continue to release those to the public. So as we work through the district meetings, we'll also be working through the policy statements that then will provide the basis for the bylaws. Our discussion will be part of policy and strategy sessions, open to the public for input and recorded for viewing and listening. We will release these documents to the public once we finalize their content. Council members will receive these in plenty of time to be well prepared for the meeting's discussion. We already started that tonight. Thank you, Councillor Smith. I met with the chair of the board of directors of Partners for Care, one of the partners in the Lumia Health Centre. This was a very constructive and informative session. The concept of what the center is intended to be involved in is still under review and development. And I think for many of us, particularly us who are new to council, we thought this was already finalized, but through that discussion, it became clear that there's an openness to considering what it is we think will fit in our community when we think about health and wellness. And I think this will be something that will be important as we go through the next couple of months. Amanda Hatt has just recently been hired as a program officer, and she will be meeting and has started meeting with a lot of community contacts, and will be meeting with some areas within our municipality with some of our residents to really understand expectations for around health and wellness and what health and wellness really means to them and how they see it playing out in terms of providing service to them in the community. So I think there's a lot of development work to happen around this project that maybe we thought was a lot was already finalized, but I would suggest there's a real openness and a willingness to consider what will really work here in our community. And I think when I discussed the needs in a rural part of Nova Scotia as opposed to what might work in HRM in a more urban setting, there was a very big openness to hear what the community has to say about that. And so I'm really encouraged by their willingness to really work with us. They were very complimentary of the staff of modl in terms of working through the logistics of settling the kind of ownership on the land piece and the development process for the project. But I'm encouraged by the openness to consider the concept and what it will look like. I received several emails regarding the development of the Blue Lantern Shellfish Farm in Mahone Bay. I met with the proponent, Paul McGinnis, and had a follow-up phone conversation to better understand where the application process is at this point. They have an option to lease agreement with the Department of Fisheries and Agriculture, and there is a lengthy and rigorous application process that will involve more public consultation. 2 of the emails were related to the impact on recreational activities in Mahone Bay, and 1 email raised environmental concerns. Unsightly and dangerous premises continue to be a significant irritant for residents. And next to roads, this is a thing that people do call me about. So I hear these complaints more frequently than I ever thought I would. And I suggest that our process for handling complaints is cumbersome and lengthy. And I think we need to address this at an upcoming committee meeting to streamline the process to expedite the resolution of issues. And I know there are many concerns around this. It's a complicated problem, but I really do think we need to address it. And it seems to just recur, and it really frustrates residents who've put in complaints, and we must be able to do better than this. I don't have an answer for it, but I know that the people around this table have good ideas, and I'm suggesting that we need to raise this and deal with it. I will remind everyone of the National Para Hockey Tournament, which will begin at the LCLC on Thursday this week. This is an event that we've supported as a municipality, so a special shout out to all the volunteers who brought this event here and worked so hard to create a great event showcasing our athletes here and showcasing our area. So that would be my report at this point. I would call for a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Moore and a seconder, Councillor Oikel. All in favor signify by raising your hand. Motion is carried unanimously. We'll move in camera.